Welcome to Conversations with Cox and Kielseth, and to be more specific, that is filmmaker Alex Cox and myself, film curator Pablo Kielseth. Alex will join us by phone from his home in Oregon, while I sneak away from my office to call him from one of the projection booths used by the International Film Series, which has been screening foreign and independent movies at CU Boulder since 1941. We will keep our chats to about 20 minutes as we discuss whatever movie-related topics grab our fancy. Thanks for joining us.
Pablo.
Alex.
How are you?
I'm pretty good. I was just at Under the Sun. They had they were offering a free beer to come on by. And so I cruised by for happy hour, and I couldn't help but think of the times when we used to have our weekly rendezvous there.
Happy days.
And on top of that, they had the Nihilist Imperial Stout on tap.
Fantastic.
So The only sad thing is that they've I won't say sad because they're doing what they need to do, but they've added a couple TV screens, and that was for the purpose of live streaming Fish concerts, which they're hoping will help bring in people. But of course, the thing that made Mountain Sun, Under the Sun, and Southern Sun special for me was that they didn't have TVs, and they're going to break that little ritual for the sake of trying to bring more people in. But they say they're only going to do it Under the Sun, so I hope that's true. And of course, they need to do what they need to do, given what a hard year it's been this past year for restaurateurs and so many other businesses.
Yeah, and who knows what will happen next?
Yeah, right. I wanted to say just off kind of on the top that a lot of my friends call me Pab, which is short for Pablo, and sounds like Bob. And I bring this up only because there's a name for verbal mistakes in which the initial consonant sounds of two words are transposed, and that's spoonerisms.
Oh yes,
and that's named after a guy,
the Reverend Spooner.
Yeah, but those are because they're transposed often to comedic effect, and they're not to be confused with malapropisms, which is a verbal mistake in which a word is substituted with another word that sounds similar but means something entirely different, also to comedic effect. And I just want to say that I would like to add to the lexicon out there malapropisms. And these are verbal mistakes in which a word is substituted with another word that doesn't sound similar, has an entirely different meaning, and zero comedic effect. And I say that because I was listening to a past podcast, and I was just astounded at the fact that I kept using obelisk instead of monolith to refer to the famous, black structure in 2001.
The artifact in 2001, and that's right, of course, because it's not an obelisk, is it? Because an obelisk is a certain particular shape, right?
Anyway, but I realized I was actually doing, I think I might do that 2 or 3 times per podcast. So I'm just leaving it out there that I wish I could correct it. It's something that is, I don't know, it's a problematic gene or something, but it's a malapropism. I can't even say my own. I'm trying to create a word, and I can't even use that word correctly. So there you have it, malapropism.
Well, and also, I hadn't mentioned this before, but I'm actually paid by the Nicaraguan government to introduce pro-Nicaraguan and socialist propaganda into every episode of our podcast. So I suppose I should mention that too at this point, right?
Well, but you at least work a segue in there, right? It's not just out of left field when you do that.
Well, it depends how much they're paying me. Some weeks I just throw any kind of stuff in there because they've given me a bump.
So we basically have malapropisms and malacoxisms.
Yep.
Can we say that? All right.
Yep.
Well, listen, speaking of mistakes or decisions that perhaps should be considered mistakes, we got an interesting email from a listener overseas writing from the UK. Adam sends us the following email. He says, "Hello. Your recent discussion on memory indirectly reminded me of Blake Edwards' interview in which he was asked about the Japanese stereotype played by Mickey Rooney in Breakfast at Tiffany's. The interview was much later in Edwards' life, and I found his contrite, embarrassed response interesting. As improbable as it seemed, at the time, he, quote, just didn't see it, and, quote, looking back, he was both astonished and dismayed. And then he goes on to add, do either of you, as filmmaker or as curator, have personal experience regarding this generally, not Breakfast at Tiffany's specifically? Is there anything you particularly look back on with a new framework you just didn't have previously? And is it possible, do you think, for us to see these things around us in the present, or are they only made visible with the progress of time?
Well, there's so many assumptions, though, aren't there, that some kind of progress is being made and that formerly invisible bad things are made visible by our continued evolution as finer and finer beings. I'm not sure if any of that is true, is it?
Well, my response to him is I typed, I said, in my email, I said, it's probably safe to say that a majority of films don't age well for one reason or another. I mean, and to take an aside, think about all the smoking that goes on in older films, or a whole host of things that transpire. People without seat belts and all that kind of stuff.
But again, that's so interesting because even like smoking, and driving a car with a diesel engine and stuff, and I mean, these are all very kind of minor infractions compared to having 800 military bases around the world.
Right.
I mean, if you're talking about pollution and the destruction of the environment and individual responsibility, no, the state has a much greater responsibility than the individual for these dreadful things. And yet we're always like, no, you're smoking,
Yeah, well,
and I don't know about putting it. I think putting it on the individual has been going on for a long time. And certainly, of course, people shouldn't smoke. They shouldn't believe crazy stuff. But, people are going to do what they're going to do.
Right. But I actually do think there's an interesting point within this here. And by the way, just to cut to the quick, I don't have a strong opinion on Blake Edwards because he's not my cup of tea. So he's never been, my guy.
No, I think the issue that our correspondent is talking about is that Mickey Rooney played this Japanese photographer who lives upstairs from Holly Golightly, and Holly's lost her keys, can't be bothered to get a new set because she'll only lose those as well, and so constantly rings his doorbell to get let into the apartment building. And so the idea is this is a guy in a permanent state of annoyance and frustration because he's a professional photographer. He wants to get her in an exclusive photography session because she's so darn beautiful. But all she does is take advantage of him constantly by ringing his doorbell. And so in a way, there's a character there, an interesting character. And my complaint wouldn't be so much that Mickey Rooney, an American white guy, was playing a Japanese character as he was playing it in a monochromatic and kind of excessively comedic way.
I mean, it is an egregious stereotype, and then we get into the whole concept of like the brown face and touch of evil, for example, and it's just the list is endless. So it's like I wouldn't even know where to begin in terms of who
is the brown face and touch of evil? Is that Charlton Heston playing
correct
a Mexican, a Hispanic character? Yeah.
But at the same time, Charlton Heston had a pivotal role in actually getting that script to screen, and
I was a great supporter of Orson Welles and was a liberal,
sure.
and was on the March to Washington and there for the "I Have a Dream" speech by MLK. Yeah, there's all of that. Yeah,
but I feel as someone who traffics with older films that every older film is going to have problems in many different ways. Like actually, just recently, I had purchased a 16 millimeter print of Stardust Memories because I have a faculty member who was considering teaching a Woody Allen class, which he then put it aside because there was just too much heat on it. But my job as someone who buys prints for faculty was to get a nice print, which I did. And it was a beautiful print. And actually, the funny thing is, I'd never seen Stardust Memories. I thought I had, but when I was checking that out for quality control, I was amazed. I was amazed that I hadn't seen it. I was actually mostly amazed at how stunning and beautiful the black and white photography was by Gordon Willis. However,
Gordon Willis shot. I mean, as I recall, it's very good, and it looks like you say, it's black and white and looks gorgeous.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the guy who did Godfather and Godfather 2, Parallax View, Pennies from Heaven. But anyway, so I'm watching this, and the thing is, I'm remembering that I opened it up to a few friends, and I had one friend who said, I refused to attend the screening because, Woody Allen. And then when I saw the film, and I'm seeing it for the first time, and there was within the movie, there's a reference to Woody Allen kind of hitting on a younger person. And there's also him making fun of a rape victim. And it was in horrible taste. It was like,
really?
There are bombs within the film that don't age well, that are pretty horrific.
Interesting.
But the cinematography was amazing. And then I'm thinking about, again, how movies are these collective works of art. And
they reflect their time and what we thought was funny. But that's very interesting because I don't even remember any of those things. I just remember the photography. And I think that, that was a fantasy of a lot of Hollywood films, not just Woody Allen, but Robert Altman films as well, is that really young and beautiful women would fall in love with fat old men, And
well, that continues, of course, throughout lots of, it continues to this day. That's the wish fulfillment of the people in charge being able to put their wishes on the screen. And sometimes they even come true, beyond the screen.
Yeah.
But I was also thinking about like Kevin Spacey, and he's problematic now, but he's been in so many movies, and Seven. I mean, what are we to say about the hard work that was put into that movie by David Fincher, Morgan Freeman, Brad Pitt, or again, speaking of cinematographers, the amazing camera work by Darius Kanji. I mean, it's to me, it seems a little bit more immoral to completely cast aside a big work of art based on the bad actions of one single individual. And at the same time, I think I'm going a little bit adrift of the question by Adam, because he wanted to know, how. Okay, so I'll get to myself.
You're talking about your experience, because he wanted to know, had we been in the situation where we had done casting or programming, which we later regretted.
Correct. Yeah, correct. So I'll leave it to you as a filmmaker. Can you answer Adam's question as a filmmaker in that regard?
I actually believe, when Stephen Colbert was actually funny a long time ago, and he used to say like how he was completely non-racist because he didn't acknowledge race, and he was in character though. Yeah, and I actually thought that was what you should do in casting. I thought that when you were casting, every role was open to every race, sexuality, complexion, gender, unless specified otherwise. And so I just thought that was a more interesting way to cast movies than to automatically assume every character was white unless otherwise specified. And so it was interesting because I used to have kind of issues with casting directors sometimes, because the default tendency for professional casting directors, especially in the US, less so in England, but more in the US, was to always present you with a raft of white faces. And then try and pepper in like a black person here and maybe even a Latino there, or an Asian.
I suddenly, Alex, now that when you have, as you just said that to me, now I understand a little bit better a comment you made to me earlier in an email about your original casting choice for Sid and Nancy.
Yeah.
Instead of Gary Oldman, you said you had who in mind?
It was that very, very funny comedian from
Sandra Bernhard.
Sandra Bernhard from King of Comedy. I thought that she should play Sid Vicious. That was my original casting choice.
Wow.
But then what would we have done if she played Sid, and she would look great playing the bass guitar on stage. If she played Sid, who would have played Nancy? That would have been interesting too, wouldn't it?
That's a very interesting question.
Yeah. Because I think this thing about, until recently, it's not just Mickey Rooney. Like Marlon Brando played an Asian guy in Tea House of the August Moon, and Fu Manchu is always played by a white guy. Charlie Chan is always played by a white guy. Like Mexicans, inverted commas, and Indians are always played by, some... some blonde white actor with a big chin, and even though we now pretend to live in more idpol times, but think about what happened with Doctor Strange, where the character of the Ancient One was a very old cisgender Tibetan guy, none of which was acceptable, because the Chinese distributors wouldn't accept a Tibetan character, and the casting had to be idpol, and so it ends up being Tilda Swinton. But wait a minute, it was an old Tibetan guy in the original comic book,
right?
And for a reason, because he's supposed to be 100 years old and the keeper of the whatever it was, and so no, it's Tilda Swinton. Oh, okay, So it does seem. And then what? So can only gay characters play gay characters?
Yeah, well, that's a conversation that's happening right now, because there's a lot there's to what extent is something cultural appropriation, to what extent is something like gender appropriation, I guess, and on and forth with. And I kind of feel like it really, everything has a context, and everything has a way in which, if you're working with someone who's playing with conventions in a empathic and knowledgeable way, I think everything should be permitted. But then there's obviously a lot of bad actors. And when I say that, I don't mean just actors. I mean, people who are not working.
Not well-intentioned.
They're not well-intentioned human beings. And they have a lot of power, and they have studio money, and they're putting out garbage that just fills other people's heads with garbage. But I feel it should be taken case by case, and we shouldn't have cookie cutter remedies for things, because that doesn't work in my mind.
No, I think that's right. You can't. I don't think these things can be prescribed. I think that everything is case by case, and the other thing, and a phenomenon which I have noticed, and I'm not the only person, a lot of people have commented on this, is why is it whenever a Hollywood film has to portray like a really evil American or a really magnificent American, they hire an English guy,
Well, you're in a position to answer that from authority. el gringo, you're an evil gringo in so many, Mexico.
That's true. I am the El Gringo in Herod's Law, the archetypal evil fucked up American, who hates Mexicans, and I'm an Englishman playing that. It's disgusting. And then I'm not alone. Look, Hannibal Lecter, J. Edgar Hoover, Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King. They're all played by English guys. Although Anthony Hopkins is Welsh, I know, but.
Okay. Well, I hadn't thought of that.
But even so, what is it with this casting that somehow the casting director's mind goes boink when they have to cast Abraham Lincoln or Dr. King? Why can't they cast an American in that role?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. I'm just going to sort of go down into the ditch and divert things a little bit by just answering that as a curator. I want to do some mea culpas. This is getting back to Adam's question to me as a curator, but I did. I am guilty of having programmed during my college days as a student such films as Ace Ventura, which is clearly very uncomfortably transphobic during as we can see now, and also 9.5 Weeks, which back then was like this very hip little film that brought in huge crowds, and it is absolutely to watch it now, it's like I don't know if I could. It's such a cringe-inducing like one it's misanthropic, misogynistic, and with like weird, it's not even like 50 Shades of Grey level stuff. Not that I've read that, but I'm just saying that those are two movies that I programmed as a programmer that I don't think I would ever program now unless there was some broader context for it. Oh, I will mention one other film, which at the time, well, and I might still have to revisit it, but Mother Jugs and Speed from 1976. Now, this was a very dark comedy about competing LA ambulance companies.
I remember it's a 70s movie with Raquel Welch is in it, and
exactly, yeah. Now this is a gritty film from the 1970s, and it's got a lot of things going for it if you're a film geek, but at the same time, it's got some incredibly demented plot points, including one where, if I recall correctly, and I might not, so don't hold me to it, but I think Larry Hagman's character is he anesthetizes women to take advantage of them. And given what we, Cosby being in, he was one of the main protagonists in this movie. And given what we now know about Bill Cosby, it's kind of impossible to see this movie and not wonder if he, might have actually been even inspired by this script for some of his own, evil ideas.
Or vice versa. He already had form for that, and they're just referencing it in the movie. Who knows? Right.
But at the same time, it's like that is something where I don't know. Again, to program that without context would be a mistake for sure. And so,
well, think about a film that I think is unreservedly good, a very good film, Blue Collar.
Oh, I was actually thinking about bringing that. Yeah, because there's a 35 print. It's been making the rounds. It played at Film Forum recently.
Good, but there's racial epithets in that might really offend people. And it does end, and it is interesting because it's very about class and about how, in the end, how the class partners, Harvey Keitel and Richard Pryor, get set against each other, and it ends with a kind of a race kind of insult trading match between these two guys, and so it's in that sense it's heavy inverted commas, but a very good film.
I think it's a smart enough film that any good programmer could program that and totally get behind it. Absolutely. But I will, I think the last point I'll make in regards to Adam's question about, a film that you thought about one way and then thought about a different way. I cannot help but think of Roger Ebert when he came to the Conference on World Affairs and he was talking about La Dolce Vita. And I know this has been referenced in several other places, but he basically talks about it was back in the early 90s that I saw him live when he was talking about how in 1960, when he saw La Dolce Vita as an adolescent, for him, it represented everything yet to come aspirationally. And then when he saw it again in like 1970, he was actually living his own version of Marcello's world in Chicago's North Avenue. The people weren't as colorful, but he was about Marcello's age. And then when he saw the movie again around 1980, he was 10 years older than Marcello's character. Ebert had stopped drinking, and he no longer saw him as a role model, but as a victim. And then, to quote here, by 1991, when I analyzed the film A Frame at a Time at the University of Colorado, Marcello seemed younger still. And while I had once admired and then criticized him, now I pitied and loved him. And when I saw the movie right after Mastroianni died, I thought that Fellini and Marcello had taken a moment of discovery and made it immortal. There may be no such thing as the sweet life, but it is necessary to find that out for yourself. End of quote.
What imaginative internal lives film critics have, to be sure.
I think my Dolce Vita would be Terry Gilliam's Brazil. Because when I first saw it, I identified in Sam Lowry, the character played by Jonathan Pryce, as this kind of a cog in the machine that I once will probably be doomed to be myself. And then I guess the difference between me and Roger Ebert is that as I got older, I realized that, as someone working at the university, my life will be full of red tape. And no matter how much I try to blow up the system, it's the risk adverse administration will overpower me. And I am basically now one scene away from being, in the torture chamber, I think. So in my case, it hasn't changed. Like, I know the movie. The stages are there. I see it coming. I see myself living it, and I am seeing myself going toward the third and final act
of Brazil.
Yeah, Brazil.
Oh, God.
All right. Well, that's what I got, and we've exceeded our time. So, Adam, I want to thank Adam for writing in and suggesting a theme.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yep. And Alex, I'll talk to you next week, and we'll take it from there.
Well, I look forward to that too. All right, man. We'll speak later.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Ciao.
And cut. Okay, that's a wrap.
Thanks again for joining Alex Cox and myself today. I'd also like to thank Jason Phelps, who provides our audio support, and Ted Thacker for permission to bookend our conversations with excerpts from his song, The Ballad of Slim Cessna. If you'd like to email us with any suggestions and or comments, you can send those to pablo@internationalfilmseries.com. Again, that's my first name, Pablo, at internationalfilmseries.com. And don't forget, the best way to fall in love with movies is to watch them on the big screen, with extra points for sainthood if you support your local and independent community art house theater. That's where you'll always find the real magic.